Welcome to Affectiva Asks, the podcast that dissects how we can put the human before the artificial as AI manifests in our daily lives. My name is Manny Vega, and I'm stepping in today for Ashley McManus. And today we're bringing you 6 interviews recorded live on site at the 2019 Emotion AI Summit. This was Affectiva's 3rd annual summit, and this year it took place on October 15th, 2019 at the State Room in Boston. There were over 40 speakers from various backgrounds, including academics, researchers, engineers, entrepreneurs, investors. We even had an artist in the house who was creating artwork live throughout the show, and she was able to present her piece at the end of the day. So that was a very creative and fascinating way to reflect on the show. Also proud to say that 43% of the speakers at this year's summit were women, which is exciting given that we do work in tech, and that's traditionally, of course, a male-dominated industry. We covered AI from all angles, including verticals like healthcare, automotive. We talked about important issues in AI like privacy, ethics, consumer trust. And besides the main stage discussions, there was also an entire workshop track that focused just on technical topics. So it was a very busy day of lively discussion. And we hope that today's podcast will bring you just a sample of all of that if you missed the summit. The theme for the event was human-centric AI, considering the human before the artificial. And to better understand what that means, let's turn it over to Affectiva CEO Rana El-Kalyoubi to explain.
The theme for this year's summit is human-centric AI. How do we design, develop, and deploy AI that puts the human at the center of this human AI equation? The day is organized into a number of panel discussions and keynote presentations around how AI can help us. How can it help us be safer, be healthier, and lead more productive lives. But also how AI is helping us create new personalized and engaging experiences. How AI is helping brands emotionally engage with their consumers and users and really understand their experiences with content and products.
In her closing comments at the summit, Rana shared a few of her own personal takeaways from the day. And she mentioned this idea of the cross-pollination of ideas that are taking place across industries. And you can think of it this way. You've got all of these worlds that have traditionally been separate, say healthcare, automotive, retail, advertising. And they've mostly existed in their own silos. But now, since all of those different industries are thinking about AI and finding ways to bring it into their business, they all have a lot more in common. There are certain ideas and lessons that they can all share as they build their businesses. And if you want a lesson on building an AI-enabled business, Rudina Cesari is the person to talk to. She's the founder and managing partner of Glasswing Ventures, where she leads their investments in AI-enabled technologies. Rudina took part in a fireside chat that was about the investor perspective to AI. So I asked her for her advice to businesses who are trying to grow in this space. And one quick note before we get into that conversation, all of today's interviews were again recorded on site at the summit, so you may hear a little crowd noise in the background. Here's Rudina.
My name is Rudina Cesari, and I'm founder and managing partner of Glasswing Ventures. We're quite excited about the disruptive nature of artificial intelligence and the adoption that AI-powered software is gaining in the market at large. I think areas like enterprise and cybersecurity in particular, given that they're a focus for us, are seeing quite a bit of AI adoption, whether it is leveraging some of the emerging techniques around machine learning, or fundamentally to completely disruptive the status quo, how business has been conducted within the enterprise world. So some of the areas where we see particularly large opportunities are around vertical industries, whether it's supply chain, logistics, around enabling the data infrastructure, which in and of its own may not be a pure AI play, but I don't think you can have the reality of intelligence become all pervasive unless you're able to have the data backbone from ability to access it and do so in a privacy conscious manner to accessing it and being able to leverage it in a cheaper, better, faster type format. So we see quite a bit of opportunity to bring those solutions to markets, and then fundamentally also around automation and human augmentation. So how do we automate the mundane across our functions functions and focus areas, freeing humans for higher level work and higher productivity work.
There's a lot of discussion at today's event about consumer trust in AI and the responsible use of AI. Do these issues factor at all into your decision making when you're looking at the market for
Absolutely. In fact, we have been, as a firm, and I personally, fairly vocal around transparent AI and the need and barriers to transparent AI, as well as the ethics involving the development of artificial intelligence. And, that spans from what data sets are being used to train the models and all the biases that come with it to how the algorithms are being constructed. Is it a generally homogeneous group of developers and machine learning experts that are working on these algorithms, and do they mirror their way of thinking, and how does that reflect eventually on other folks with other backgrounds? So it's both the data biases and the algorithmic biases that we think about and take into consideration. And honestly, establishing a body of standards around it is important, because if we don't, I think the regulatory environment will kick in.
Do you think those standards, is that within the industry? Is that from a policy perspective, like government level?
Yeah, I mean, look, if we don't do right as collectively as an industry, from the incumbent players to the startups and everyone in between, I think while slowly, eventually, the regulations will emerge. Yeah. So it's a choice between let's do what's best because it's also good ourselves versus being forced upon us.
So a lot of folks who work at AI technology companies will be listening to this podcast. What advice would you have for them as they're building their businesses, or just things to consider?
Yeah. I'll highlight 2 points, perhaps. One has to do with teams and team formations. Just, being cognizant of the fact that team dynamics are slightly different for AI, first or AI native companies. While previously you had the technical leader and typically co-founder and the business leader, now you have this third person in the leadership team that's oftentimes a researcher or a machine learning expert. And so the dynamics are different just by sheer changing of numbers. But secondly, the DNA is different. Typically, in a startup, you're working to develop the minimum viable product and get it out of the door. Researchers typically tend to be perfectionists. So how do you balance those cultural dynamics? And that's something that we don't talk enough about and we don't spend enough time on, but very important and critical to the output, to the product development. The other facet to consider is on the go-to-market side. If you think about it, because you're constantly training the algorithms, day one, when you're selling the product to a customer, is possibly the day that you are least valuable, because you still need more data to train your algorithms and to continue on the improvement curve. So thinking carefully about the go-to-market, how do you balance the my software is not at the highest performance level yet, with customers who will not be patient to wait for the performance to catch up. So how can you create value day one while you're still improving?
One company that's already finding a way to bring value to its customers is Catalia Health. They created the Meibu platform. It's a cute little AI-enabled robot that's designed for in-home patient care. It's a fascinating application of AI in healthcare, and it's a good example of that human-machine partnership that allows people to work smarter and be more productive. Dr. Corey Kidd is founder and CEO of Catalia Health. He participated in a panel about the human-machine partnership, so we asked him to explain how Meibu mixes technology and psychology to improve patient care.
My name is Dr. Corey Kidd. I'm the founder and CEO of Catalia Health. So my background is I've been working at the intersection of healthcare and technology, largely AI, for over 20 years now. A lot of that's been focused on figuring out how we solve some of the challenges around aging and chronic care management. So things that we need to do at scale, which is a difficult thing to do using only people in the way that we've traditionally delivered medicine. So Catalia Health is a chronic disease care management company. And instead of bringing patients into a clinic or making calls to a patient patient on a every month or two basis, we put a cute little robot in our patients' homes and use entirely AI-generated conversations to check in with that patient, educate them, understand what's going on, and get all the relevant information back to their clinical caregivers, the doctor or the nurse or the pharmacist who's helping to manage the treatment of that individual. And what the AI is doing is creating a conversation for that patient, and it might start off with some version of, "Oh, hey, how are you feeling today? How are you doing?" And based on that person's answer, can go off in many different directions. If they're feeling great, maybe some tips and advice or a reminder. If they're feeling not so well, understand what's going on, offer some advice that's relevant to what that person is experiencing right then, and let someone know. So get that information back to a doctor or nurse or somebody who can do follow-up as appropriate.
Yeah, I was going to ask that question. So how does it kind of coordinate with their overall care team?
So it really depends on the particular situation. So a lot of the work we do is actually with patients who are on particular drugs. And in that case, we're tied back to the pharmacy. So the pharmacist or the nurse at the pharmacy is getting information on what's going on with that patient. In other cases, we're working directly with the providers. And so the doctor or the nurse there might get some information. And how that happens depends on a particular setup or the particular workflow of who we're working with. That might go into the existing medical record. It might trigger some sort of an alert, which could be an automated call or a text message or an email. So there's a lot of ways that data can actually get back, but we make sure that it ties into what those people are doing already in terms of their day-to-day activities.
So your panel today focuses on human-centric AI and how it relates especially to emotional health and well-being. And so obviously the platform you're talking about, it sounds like patient care, drug management, that sort of thing. How do you think AI can support emotional health and well-being?
Well, the foundation of what we do is not the technology, it's the psychology behind it. And a lot of that's about building relationships, and a good chunk of that is around emotion and understanding what's going on and how to adapt to a person. One of the analogies that we constantly think of in what we build is when we talk about a doctor who has good bedside manner. We don't mean that she or he has more or less clinical knowledge than someone else. They're better at connecting to a patient. And a lot of that's around emotion. So while ultimately what we're trying to do is deliver better healthcare and deliver better clinical outcomes for our patients, it comes down to the psychology and the emotion and how we connect to them that lets us do that.
So keeping that in mind, the cute little robot that you guys have designed, I'm sure there are certain decisions made in terms of how it interacts with patients in their homes and maybe even how it was designed. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we work with IDEO, the big design firm, to come up with the design of this particular robot. And the design brief that we started with was very simple. So really just three things. And one, and the most important, is this has eyes that can make eye contact. And that's not a gimmick. It's really psychology. When you look at someone, when you're talking to them face to face versus over the phone or a text message or an email, there's a different relationship that's created there. And it turns out the psychology behind that applies in the world of technology as well. So that was the first. The second is there's a screen on there. So Meibu is something that you can interact with entirely through conversation, but having what she's saying shown on that screen or some buttons to use for response there also is a quick way to learn how to use a system like this and a nice second interface for interaction. And third is we wanted this roughly the size of a kitchen appliance. Given technology today, we could build this the size of your smartphone. It's going to get tossed in a drawer or a closet or lost. Or you could build it the size of you or I, right? You could build it the size of a human, but that doesn't fit into a home very well. And so that was it. So, the really simple set of things that we started with, and then looking a lot at different aspects of design and how this fits into people's lives and homes is a really important part of getting people to accept something like this. And it's very deliberate that it doesn't look like what we think of as a piece of medical technology.
Right. And what kind of feedback have you received from patients, and how's that informed your design decisions?
Well, I'll tell you one thing that we've seen over 12 years now of putting these kinds of things in front of patients is that whenever we do a pilot or a trial that's for a limited time, our biggest challenge is that patients don't want to give these back.
Okay.
and we hear people talking about them like they're, friends, and, they're really useful, and it's made such a difference in their lives. And so, that's the kind of feedback that we love to hear from patients.
So earlier in the day, there was a poll of the audience and they were given like a multiple choice option. What would you trust AI to do in your life? One option was consult on your health, and I think it was about 22% of people answered in that way. Thinking about trust in healthcare, how do we earn the public's trust that this technology is safe, that it ensures privacy, that there is kind of that room for your physician who you do know to intervene if needed?
So, for better or worse, there's not a simple, straightforward answer to that question. And the reason I say that is we actually have to bring together a lot of different pieces to ensure that we do that. Right? So one is making sure that we build systems to be, private and secure. And, everybody in the industry who's working for patient care, I think, does a pretty good job of that. It's something that we definitely focus on. Another piece of it is, how we communicate to patients what this does, and just as importantly, what it doesn't do. And I think that, talking about the limitations of the technology so that patients and, other people using this have an understanding of, what it's good for and what it's not good for really helps to establish the appropriate boundaries. If you start to promise too much or imply that it does something that it doesn't, you're just going to disappoint people and they're not going to like it. They're not going to use it. And so I think that's actually one of the important parts that maybe is not done so well in the industry overall today.
As I said earlier, a lot of ideas in this space really cut across industries. So today we're seeing non-healthcare companies design solutions for health and wellness and have AI baked into those solutions. So one good example is automotive. Dana Lowell is Global Director of Open Innovation and Technology Ventures at Forcia. They are the world's largest supplier of interior systems for the automotive space. We asked Dana about the impact of AI to improve health and wellness for passengers in their vehicles, and also some of the important considerations around things like data privacy and consumer trust.
AI provides an ability to be available anytime. It can be pervasive. At Forcia, we're using AI for emotional and wellness inside the vehicle environment. We can put multimodal sensors inside the vehicle and be aware of the individual's stress level and the basics of their wellness, and then we can introduce available remedies to the inside the vehicle. Obviously, heating and cooling, comfort adjustments via the seating, entertainment options, and other things that can impact and hopefully have the individual get out of the vehicle feeling better than when they got into the vehicle.
So you guys are using it more as a way to collect information about the person in the vehicle and then also respond appropriately.
Yes, yeah. Collect the information, analyze the information, then introduce the appropriate therapies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think this is kind of a newer area for automotive. I think when health and well-being when that topic is brought up, it may not be something that people automatically think of the automotive industry as being kind of a solution to it. So how do you envision well-being factoring into the future of the transportation experience?
Well, the vehicles are in this steady transition from active driving to, at least in some time during the driving experience, being autonomous or semi-autonomous. So during those time frames, there's an opportunity to introduce other benefits to the driver and the passenger. So we see the market really expanding in terms of transition from being the driver only focused to really providing experiences for everyone that's in the vehicle, and those experiences, one of the ones we're really focused on is this wellness and health perspective.
And do you look at, does the number of passengers in the vehicle impact kind of how the vehicle responds? Like, could you respond to a group as opposed to just an individual?
Yes, I mean we have technologies that allow us to look at how many people are in the vehicle, how they're seated in the vehicle. They're characterize them based on movement and activity levels, and then you can use that information to help you to introduce singular solutions for each of those occupants based on what they're currently doing and involved in.
So thinking about things from a technology perspective, I know Forcia has this concept called the cockpit of the future.
Correct.
Tell us a little bit about that and kind of what are the technical challenges that went into building that solution?
Cockpit of the future is really just a bubble of the environment and interfaces to the vehicle interior. So it's seating, and it's the cockpit itself, and then it's control of the different attributes that environment provides. Again, sound, scent, all the stimuli, sensorial stimuli, entertainment, seating position, seating posture, therapies introduced through the seat, aromatherapy, etc. So it's really looking at all the different ways that you interact with the vehicle, and then providing the best solution to you. And also, obviously, connectivity is a big part of it, and how does it connect to both vehicles around it and infrastructure that may be around it.
And I know there's been research done into this sort of thing. Do you have a sense for what consumers are looking for from that in-cabin experience?
I think consumers want to be connected. Consumers want to have entertainment on demand. Consumers want to be comfortable. Consumers want flexibility of the interior. And that's something that is another activity that we're heavily engaged in, is how do we have a more flexible environment in terms of everything from activity to seating position inside the vehicle. Obviously some of the challenges right now is durability. Driving is, an involved activity, so driver monitoring in terms of drowsiness and attentiveness is a key factor right now in terms of a technical challenge. Also, vibrational input to some of the sensors creates noise within their analytics and their data output, so that's another area that we're working hard on. How do we get a lower or higher signal-to-noise ratio and eliminate, unwanted interference to some of the sensors.
There's been a big theme around trust today, trust in technology, trust in AI specifically. How are you thinking through that challenge when you guys are developing these sort of solutions for?
Yeah, well, I think that any AI applications has to be for the benefit of the consumer. The value has to be there. It can't be about tracking the consumer or monitoring the consumer. I think that's one of the transition points that we're at right now, that we've got to be really more about monitoring with a benefit rather than just monitoring for attentiveness to the driving task, and that's emerging. But I think that automotive in general is a fairly well-trusted industry in terms of the level of quality and reliability and data protection that the industry provides. So I don't see a big element of fear in that way, but I think that in general, AI needs to be used as a tool that provides benefit to the end consumer. The consumer needs to approve and want the outcomes from the AI exercise.
So last question, a question we like to ask a lot on this podcast. If your car could do one thing to make your life better in the future, what would that be?
Help us become better humans.
That's an interesting answer. What do you mean by that?
I think if it can make us more aware of the environment and the people around us and the status of the external environment, I think that hopefully that will get us all outside of our bubble and be more understanding, more empathetic individuals.
Diving deeper into this topic, there was a whole section on automotive at this year's summit, and a lot of related issues to unpack in that industry. So you have, passenger safety, you have the challenges of the transportation system overall that includes not just individual vehicles, but also the issue of mass transit. You have automotive's impact on the environment, of course, consumer trust, these evolving in-car experiences, a lot of different issues within the automotive space. And we cover much of this with John Suh. He is the head of Hyundai Cradle, and that's an acronym that stands for the Center of Robotic Augmented Design in Living Experiences. We started our conversation by asking John to talk about the overall state of transportation and some of the major challenges within transit that AI can help solve. Thinking broadly about the state of transportation today, what are some of the major challenges and shortcomings in that space right now?
So on the shortcomings and challenges is, I would say, I'll give my answer from a kind of systems perspective. And so one of them is certainly congestion. As the population of the planet is moving toward urban centers, we just have more people in virtually the same physical footprint. So how do we move people in and around in a way that is not too burdensome in terms of time is a real challenge. The second challenge is related to energy. how do we move those people in a way that the energy is either sustainable or clean or renewable? And the third area, I would say, is the area of how do we manage the production costs so that we produce vehicles that are appropriate for especially what I call digital mobility. Digital mobility would be mobility that we can get through an app or through some ride-hailing service. And those vehicles are, the vehicles that we produce today are made for personally owned or personal usage. They're not necessarily made for ride-hailing or kind of transit services. And so the supply chain and the manufacturing systems were designed for a different kind of business model, and is successful for high volume. For digital mobility, we believe that the volumes will tend to be smaller by comparison. So how do we shift the supply chain and the manufacturing processes to are more suitable for that lower volume? And typically in a manufacturing, high volume manufacturing, the lower the volume, the more expensive per vehicle. So how do we shift that curve so that the vehicles coming out for mobility services are at a cost point that is suitable for digital ride-hailing services?
So that's interesting. It's like an entirely new stream of production and also production challenges for this new emerging market of digital mobility.
Yeah, I think so, because there'll be other cases where thinking about the manufacturing, the production, and supply chain for that will be important. So not only for four-wheeled vehicles for digital mobility, but also potentially one day urban air mobility, which has almost the opposite problem in that today's commercial vehicle or privately owned aircraft are relatively low volume compared to automotive. And so we anticipate that if one day urban air mobility takes off, pardon the pun, there will be more of them in terms of volume than a typical commercial or private jet. So the opposite problem is how do we increase volume of aircraft production, again, without increasing the costs of production.
So where does AI fit into the picture then for solving some of these challenges that we're talking about?
Yeah, so I think the area of congestion, I think one of the things that AI could do is provide at the short term, kind of planning and traffic control of a metro region to communicate to commuters and transit agencies about kind of predictive on the loads and the kind of traffic patterns that can be anticipated for any given day, or even actually kind of in 1 hour increments or less, sort of like just prediction factors. So people just have greater awareness of what to expect, sort of like a forecast for traffic. Longer term, though, I think it would be great if AI can use all that data for how people move in and out, where people are living, what kinds of options people have, and kind of provide a kind of data-driven insights to better plan transportation services, models for what kinds of services would be appropriate for people to use, maybe giving information to service providers or manufacturers on the kinds of vehicles or the kind of services that should be offered that aren't being offered. And then finally, how to integrate that with existing transit services, whether it's rail or bus or ferry.
It sounds like, I didn't mean to interrupt, it sounds like you're describing almost using AI on a municipal level to think about, like, okay, what do people need here? And therefore, how can we work with manufacturers and suppliers to bring those type of vehicles in or design the systems? Is that essentially?
Yeah, exactly. Really kind of, I say, data-driven insights on the way that people, and actually goods, logistics, if you will, kind of flow right into and out of the city. One thing I haven't touched upon is the use of delivery services for e-commerce. That's increasing, and that will also drive up traffic and road usage in cities as well, as people prefer, or the ease of which you can order something online and get it relatively quickly is just attracting a lot of people to do that more and more.
Of course. Another topic of conversation today, certainly, looking at just sort of individual mobility as well, and in-car experiences. Is that something you guys are in your organization thinking about, like how to design those in-car experiences for people?
So I'll begin my answer by saying that there are the 4 C's of providing a great experience in the car. So the first one is about control or sense of control. Next, above that, and these things build upon each other. So having a sense of control, then you can then think about how to increase your comfort or be more comfortable. And once you have that, then you're able to be thinking about how to connect. And by connecting, I mean either connecting with 3 levels. One, yourself, you and the vehicle, if you're driving the vehicle, and third, you and other people, other road users, other pedestrians, other the world around you. And then fourth and final is clarity, and that's really more about the higher mental functions like learning and sort of understanding the sense of time and what we do with our time, etc. So if I get back into the control and comfort level, one of the things that we're working on is if we anticipate our Hyundai Motor Group getting into mobility services, the issue of the issue, especially of comfort, is like how comfortable do people feel to get into a shared vehicle, and how can the AI be used to help them know that they'll be in a kind of comfortable and in a controlled environment. So the example is cleanliness. So we have these vehicles moving around. It's essentially a public space. Could the AI with sensors and maybe other information make a pretty high accurate determination? Oh, this car should be maintained or spiffed up or clean, so that the next person is going to feel like they're getting a great ride, right? And so things like say combination of vision or artificial nose sensors, and using that data to make a determination. You know what? We should probably take this car offline for a few minutes, take it to a place where we can clean it up, get it spiffed off, and put it back on the road so everybody's happy.
Yeah, that's an interesting dimension to comfort that you hadn't really thought about, but it makes sense when as a passenger.
Because in airplanes, they service typically, it's that 30, 40 minutes between the time lands and you board is they're doing their best to clean up, right? And so I think if you, in a airline context, when you don't have a clean seat or don't have a clean area, you're a little kind of upset, kind of a thing, right? Because you're already cramped as it is.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting factor. Are there others that you have come across in your work that might surprise people, like consumer priorities when it comes to the future of mobility here, like what I'm looking for inside of a car?
Yeah, nothing in particular, to be honest with you. One of the things, though, that I will anticipate as a issue is how can we improve the occupancy of, especially for in a ride hailing or a shared ride. How do we get to, if we really need to improve from single occupancy ish, which is in the world of personally owned cars, it's one-ish, right? But how do we get to 1.3, 1.4, 1.5? Even those, incremental improvements, if we will make a dramatic improvement in the congestion problem, right? And so maybe the AI part could be, and a smart algorithm to determine a good way to not only connect people who are close in terms of location and destination, but also maybe kind of personal profiles. You might find this person interesting to ride with, right? That could be, I think, a great benefit of the use of AI in shared mobility.
How are you thinking about the issue of trust? This is something that's come up a lot today. And when you think about it in the context of automotive, it could be trust in the vehicle itself, or it could mean maybe trust in, say, data usage, that sort of thing. I mean, how are you guys thinking about that?
So I would say in the context of digital or ride-hailing services, I think there are 3 important things that if they happen, then we become or could become more willing to be trustful. One of it is cost transparency. Do I know that this ride will cost this much, and I know why it costs that much, or I feel like it's a fair price for that service? The second thing would be convenience. Is it easy for me to hail a ride? Is the time by which that ride comes predictable? Do I know that for human-driven cars that the person is a decent driver, et cetera? And the third thing is the kind of the experience itself of driving. Is it something that I got what I expected out of this experience? Was it easy for me to get to where I wanted to go? And I think if you provide this in a consistent, reliable basis, then we'll become more trusting of that thing or that service.
Yeah. The final word on automotive goes to David Vosner. He is general manager at Local Motors, which is an auto manufacturer that's doing a lot of interesting things in terms of how it actually designs, builds, and operates its vehicles. Local Motors created a self-driving vehicle called Ollie. It's a sort of trolley that can shuttle a group of people, and it's got AI and sensors baked right into its controls. It controls how the vehicle operates, how it interacts with passengers. So there are Ollies out there on roads right now, but in controlled environments or planned routes on corporate campuses or military bases. And we wanted to talk to David about Ollie's current pilot programs, because if the future of mobility truly involves these self-driving AI-powered vehicles, then it's useful to find out how passengers today are reacting to their experiences in these types of vehicles and how they feel about the future of mobility. So here's David.
Fundamentally, we are a vehicle manufacturer. If you dig beneath that, we do that differently than anyone else in the world. So we believe in co-creation, which is open vehicle development, leveraging the crowd. And then we use microfactories, so small factories, using leading digital manufacturing methods to make those vehicles. So long story short, right, we are a vehicle manufacturer, but we call ourselves the world's first digital vehicle manufacturer because we use an online platform with digital manufacturing in small factories to make vehicles.
So the innovation here is not just the types of vehicles you're creating, but also the process behind it.
The types of vehicles are kind of the box, right? And there's some innovation within that box. Like Affectiva going in it, or see-through OLED screens and autonomy and electrification. But the process to reinventing how to manufacture without huge supply chains around the world, huge numbers of components on the vehicle is probably the breakthrough innovation of our organization.
So when I visit the Local Motors site, they've got this vehicle Ollie pretty prominently featured. And you mentioned Affectiva briefly there, so there is some AI baked into that vehicle, is that correct?
Correct. So we started off with, when we launched it in 2016, with the effort around integrating Watson, for example. So now we've integrated Watson Assistant and Alexa and some other AI features that allow the vehicle to communicate with the operator or the rider, right? Because currently we still have a safety steward in the vehicle, so there's other ways that operator can communicate with the vehicle. But then there's obviously also other technology and capability in the vehicle to make it autonomous, right? So there's one way of how to interact with riders that utilizes artificial intelligence and advanced connected electronics, and then there's other machine learning, machine vision, artificial intelligence that enables the vehicle to operate without really any human driver. Then there's a third way, which is the AI is in use to interact with the infrastructure and potential partners outside of the vehicle, right? Other drivers, pedestrians, bicyclists, buildings, traffic signals, so on and so forth.
And it is in use in real-world contexts right now, right?
Right.
Including
we're deployed. We're deployed in National Harbor, Maryland, as one of our oldest, longest-standing efforts. We started testing there 3 years ago, but we're also in Australia, Korea, other parts of North America, Europe. We're about to announce some deployments in Europe, and we're about to announce a deployment in the Middle East. So, and then we're working on efforts in Mexico and Latin America as well. So we're going to very soon hit all 5 or 6 continents. I don't think we'll go to Antarctica anytime soon. So the 7 one will be elusive, but...
Well, and just to give people kind of a picture of how it's being used, it's sort of like a public transit option, right? Or is that how you would call it? Or?
I would say it's the current use of Ollie, and I think, as the product, as we get to product expansion and extensions, right? Larger vehicles, faster speeds, different types of use cases will develop. Right now, I think it is filling a gap where it serves primarily for various reasons, including regulation. We're serving primarily campus environments, university campuses, medical campuses, military campuses, corporate campuses, so on and so forth. It, fills a gap that currently exists in first and last mile transportation. So, we're pretty good at getting, for example, to Logan. And then we're pretty good from a public transit perspective to get from Logan maybe to, the station in downtown. But then from that station to the hotel, what are my options for that 800, 900, 1,000-yard walk? Okay, I can take a scooter. Well, that's not really effective if I have luggage. Yeah. I can call an Uber or a Lyft, but that's kind of pricey. I can maybe connect if I'm good and I understand the transit. I can get on a bus, but that may not be very convenient. So that's where I think a lot of that first last mile gap can be fixed and filled by something like an Ollie.
How have riders reacted to the experience in just kind of being a passenger in one of these vehicles?
So we've now, as I said, deployed in kind of 4 continents, deployments in 10 major markets. We have about 25 vehicles operating on a daily basis around the world. And, there's kind of 2 different ways of people's reactions. One, there's obviously the reaction of, is this your first autonomous vehicle, self-driving vehicle ride? And there's actually a psychology behind, right? Do you call this vehicle self-driving or do you call it driverless? People actually are more scared of driverless because they feel like, well, if it's driverless, who's watching this? So right now we have a safety steward, so that's why it's self-driving. We don't call it driverless. And in the future, it may never be driverless because we may have teleoperations that do remote supervision. So there's the reaction of riders to being in a self-driving vehicle, and I think they overcome that pretty quickly because within like 30 seconds they're not even cognizant of it anymore. They're just like, okay, well, how does it brake, or how does it feel when it brakes, or how does it feel when it accelerates? So I think that's one reaction of being very quickly convinced, like, this is just like getting in a plane and you don't really think about who's flying the plane. And oftentimes, actually, it's autopilot that's flying the plane, not a person. And then the second piece is, the overall experience of the vehicle, because it's fundamentally different than you and I getting in a Lyft or an Uber, and we're sitting like this, right? You in front of me, or I'm in front of you, or side by side. Now we're kind of in a U-shaped, almost conference room environment, right? And with 360-degree views, and people, I think, 1, are surprised at how safe they feel, and 2, are surprised at the smooth and relative comfort of a self-driving vehicle, right? Obviously, in early technology, there's always some things that may be not as smooth as you would think of a driver. But the other, and maybe this is the third part is riders have vastly different subjective views on rider profiles, right? And this, I think, boils down to you and I may have completely different driving styles, right? I may be a pedal to the metal kind of guy. After every stoplight, I take off and I'm like hitting 40 as fast as I can to get to the other stoplight to then brake. And you may be like, there's a stoplight. I'm going to just go 10 miles an hour and cruise down there. So I think from that perspective, we've had some interesting responses and feedback to how people perceive the Ollie interacting with pedestrians or bicyclists. Some people feel like it's too aggressive. Some people feel like the vehicle's not aggressive enough and lets other drivers and other occupants of the road always come first. So it's all very subjective, I think. So those are, I think, the three things. One, getting over the fact that it's self-driving very quickly. Two, the overall smoothness and experience of the ride, that it brakes relatively well, it changes lanes relatively well. And then three, the actual rider profile when thinking about it from a subjective perspective of, is this aggressive, is this not aggressive? Right. So those are some of the feedbacks.
So it sounds like when it comes to trust in self-driving vehicles, it's not a monolith, right? It's sort of dependent on the individual person and then other factors that it seems like you guys have accounted for, like the in-vehicle experience, that sort of thing.
Well, I think part of the in-vehicle experience, right, which that is a whole nother level of what now in a self-driving vehicle I can offer riders, right? Can I offer them additional productivity? Can I offer them additional comfort? So I think there's a whole set of additional layers of how do we make the experience as relevant, pertinent, comfortable to that individual rider. And one aspect of that is the rider's profile. So yes, like we've had customers, for example, on a military base where our target speed is kind of like 12 miles an hour, but their roads are all like 25 miles an hour, so their average speed is probably closer to like 22, 23, 30 miles an hour. So 12 is kind of slow. So they're like, can we speed this up, right? And that's where now you're talking. Now, obviously, if you speed it up, that means if you brake hard, right, your ride comfort becomes less comfortable. So these are all things of not just how does the vehicle operate and that comfort, but also how do you enhance the experience, in-cabin experience, which goes beyond just ride speed and ride, distance and things like that.
Yeah. Okay. My last question then, you mentioned briefly that in the future maybe the vehicles might be like teleoperated or there might not be someone present in the vehicle. Is that a barrier? Do people need to have that person in control, like present in the vehicle, or do you feel like it's kind of case by case?
So I think there's a part analogs, right? One is the elevator, right? When we used to, in the 90s, not that in the 1900s, not that you and I remember this, but even, for example, I'm from Detroit, when I go to Lions football games, there's still a elevator operator in there, right? On rare occasions, but it is because, they don't want people hitting buttons crazy and anyway. But that's one thing. It took a while, it took like 40 years for elevators to become so standard, safe, mainstream that the operators and the building managers didn't feel the need to have a person attending the elevator. That's one example where it took 40 years to get rid of an operator. For example, even though we all know that 95 to 98% of a flight from Boston to DC or Boston to Detroit is automated, right? And the pilot is just there in case stuff happens. I don't know if we'll ever get to a day where airlines and passengers are comfortable enough to not have a pilot on board. Yeah. So I think we're in between that, 40 years to get off and, never getting off. Yeah. I think eventually we'll get off. I hope it's less than 40 years or 50 years. I think because of ultimately the business model for certain use cases will depend on it. In other use cases, that onboard steward can provide a number of functions that may be value added to the operator of the vehicle and the riders of the vehicle, that they may still be on board and have a safety aspect or a comfort aspect, but they actually have a role that, is way beyond that. So I can't tell the future, and so I try not to make predictions that don't age well, but for certain use cases of self-driving vehicles, removing the operator or an in-person operator and replacing it with someone that may be doing remote supervision of a fleet of vehicles, I think will be important. In other cases, the safety operator will take on a different role that's value add to the riders or the fleet managers.
Finally, we wanted to finish today's podcast with a broader discussion about the responsible use of AI. Every different AI use case that we've talked about today, or that's just out there in general, of course, has implications for issues like data privacy, the public's trust, ethics. And the summit actually finished the day with 3 different panels on this subject, AI ethics. So this next interview is with Tara Lyons. Tara is the executive director of the Partnership on AI, and they publish research, educational material, insights, all about the responsible use of AI across industries. And actually, in a previous role, Tara worked under the Obama administration, and she co-directed the White House Future of Artificial Intelligence Initiative. So she's really one of the top thinkers on the future of AI and its ethical implications. So here's that conversation with Tara.
My name is Tara Lyons. I'm the executive director at the Partnership on AI.
So Tara, in a Q&A before this event, it was a blog post that Affectiva published, you had an interesting answer that I wanted you to elaborate on if you could. You said you were encouraged that traditional AI research has evolved beyond technical research and more into interdisciplinary fields. Could you just elaborate on that and explain why that evolution is so important?
Sure. Yeah, happily. So I think it deserves some clarifying as well, maybe, in that the AI research field, as it has traditionally been encompassed, has been a technical research field insofar as it has been comprised mostly of computer scientists working on machine learning development and new applications for machine learning. And I think that there has largely been a widening of the sort of aperture recently around what is considered expertise within and related to that field. And it is such that it has allowed for there to be a much broader understanding for other types of disciplines and their relation to computer science and its impact on people and society. So I guess that's part an elaboration and in part a clarification. I think the best part about that dynamic has been that there has been a ton of work happening within those other disciplines and fields for a very long time. These include disciplines like science and technology studies and anthropology and sociology and many others. And I think that organizations and individuals that have been in more constrained computer science-oriented environments, you can't see my air quotes, but I'll describe them, have really come to understand the importance of those fields to their work. So that kind of marriage, I think, is really, really crucial for us to better understand what technology is doing to society and how to ensure that we're making sure the benefits of it are broadly distributed and its challenges are appropriately mitigated.
So on that note, earlier today, there was an audience poll taken here at the event, and it asked people who is responsible for the ethical development and deployment of AI. And I have the answers here. There was 4 different groups given. We had government, technology industry, businesses and brands using AI, and human rights and consumer advocacy groups. So as you can see there, the answer was pretty overwhelmingly the technology industry, which maybe is not surprising given the audience here at the event. But would you agree with that? Is there a bigger role for public policy to play in making sure that AI is used responsibly?
Yeah, well, I think that it's sort of a false choice to say that it has to be any one of those institutions or groups. I think it has to be all of them, and they all have a different part to play in terms of what their role should encompass in supporting effective governance. Definitely government is among those stakeholders. I think maybe first and foremost among those stakeholders, because there are certain protections that government and policy and the legal system can uniquely afford to citizens. So, due process protections, regulatory constraints and opportunities are provided by policy, and there is a different incentive structure for government to actually work in the public's interest, essentially, that doesn't necessarily exist right now in the technology industry. So I think that those are some of the unique roles that government at least can play in servicing technology governance. But I definitely think it can't be just one or the other. I think it, like I said before, I really think it has to be a marriage of a lot of those different institutional modalities in order to ensure that we're really effectively addressing what we need to be addressing.
In your experience, is there a way for technology companies to kind of cooperate with government agencies?
Yeah.
What would you recommend there?
Yeah, totally. I think, certainly, I don't want it to be lost that there's definitely an obligation, or at least a responsibility, of industry to ensure that they are thinking about things beyond just shareholder benefit. I think that there's a increasingly strong set of voices emerging around advocating for that position on behalf of commercial entities, and I think that even that aside, as a sort of emergent movement in corporate responsibility, I think there is still a really important role for companies to play in making sure that government is well positioned to make informed choices about policy decisions. So there, as specific examples go, there's a real need for government to be in conversation with the sort of multi-stakeholder realm, as we call it, which encompasses not just companies and industry, but also civil society and advocacy organizations and academic institutions. And our organization does a lot of that type of collaborative inter-sector work. And government has a lot to learn from organizations that are producing and implementing technology too, because government is notoriously under capacity in its ability to understand and grapple with technology-related issues. So, for example, the lack of people in government who understand the current state of the art and what it might bring is a real challenge. It was definitely a challenge when I was working in policy and government, and it continues to be a challenge in a lot of different jurisdictions today, not just here in the United States, but in other places as well. And so it's really the obligation of both government and industry to make sure that they are mutually informing one another and surfacing the issues that really need to be addressed.
Certainly an undercurrent and a theme of this particular event is trust, consumer trust in AI in particular. And we've been asking a lot of folks on this podcast, like how do technology companies earn that trust? What are the sort of important steps to do? Do you have a position on that, or any thoughts around like what companies can actually do? I mean, there is the technology perspective, right? So maybe be transparent with the way you're capturing and collecting data, that sort of thing. But is there something that I guess technology companies haven't thought of? Like,
that's $1 million question, at least. This is a relatively vague answer just because this is such a big topic area, but I think it really has to be a multifaceted approach. Trust is a really big word, and I think it encompasses a lot of different facets of how consumers understand the role of technology in their life at like a sociological level, including at the institutional level. What is the relationship of a consumer with any given company or entity or product or service? So I guess within that superstructure, it's really important for organizations to, like you said, think about transparency, making sure that they are really acting in service of consumers and demonstrating that actively. And that can mean a whole host of different things depending on what the product or service is and what the type of institution might be. And certainly I think trust is not just something that is like a plugin, right? Yeah. Or enabled by a plugin. It really has to be built over time. And so when we're talking about consumer trust, I think what we're talking about is something temporal as well. It's something that spans, any given era or particular specific product, and really is something that has to be serviced and prioritized continuously. So I don't have any great pro tips, unfortunately. No. I think it has to be a holistic approach, and so I guess that would be my advice more than anything else.
No, it's good advice. And kind of along those same themes, there was an earlier session on kind of the human-machine partnership, and how AI is essentially augmenting certain roles in certain industries, and how people and machines can play well together. But I thought we've been taking questions from the audience. There was an interesting question from the audience where they said, well, isn't this sort of just a projection? I mean, you can't really have conflict between humans and machines. It's the humans who are controlling the machines, right? So isn't this just kind of the same old issues we've been having forever between, say, like corporations that hold data or corporations that devise these sort of technologies and the consumers who consume those things? Do you have a certain perspective on that?
Sometimes we have the wrong paradigm around what it looks like to act responsibly with regard to data or data products, in that data is really driven by people, right? And so the systems and structures that undergird it, if they're biased or if they have other challenges, are often actually driven by people to begin with, or by systems built by people, right? So there are a lot of canonical examples of that. One of them that comes first to mind is the criminal justice system and associated data product applications within that domain, which have emerged as very problematic, and often because the data itself is problematic. But when you take a step toward that problem space, you really start to understand within context within the socio-technical context, what that actually entails. The data is problematic because the criminal justice system is often itself problematic. So I don't know if that really directly gets to your question,
No, it does,
but
yeah.
I think that considering things in context is often really helpful in understanding what the true nature of the challenge is. And I don't know that we really do that often enough with technology products.
Yeah. So when you think about the future of AI, what is the best case scenario for kind of human and AI interactions and the responsible use of AI? And then are there certain use cases that excite you the most personally?
Yeah, well, I think one of the most exciting use cases and sort of technology futures brought by what we are hopefully working to develop right now is one in which we can actually start to parse and better understand the fallibility of human judgment and work to fix it by introducing, basically other forms of assistance into our decision making as humans. Human judgment is far from perfect. It is often the best solution that we have, but it doesn't mean it has to be the only one into perpetuity. So the more sophisticated we get about understanding the sort of sharp edges of technology that are being, technology products that are being produced right now and working to ameliorate those challenges, the better we can be at allowing technology to come into parts of daily life that really need assistance, essentially. So whether it is making decisions about what you should purchase on the internet, or in much, much more high stakes circumstances, assisting with making the worst parts of human judgment much better than they are right now. I think that presents a really enormous opportunity, and one we have to be really, really careful about taking advantage of, obviously, for a whole host of reasons, but still is an opportunity nonetheless. And I think there are many, many other applications that will come between where we are now and that optimal future state as well. And a lot of those that at least I'm excited about at the moment are in healthcare applications, especially. I think there's a huge amount of growth and investment opportunity there for making technology serve people better and serve human health more effectively. And also in environmental applications as well, where another space much like healthcare, there's just a ton of data and not a ton of analytical power that has been moved against it. And so I think there's a huge opportunity for AI to help us there as well.
Hope you enjoyed today's episode, and it's really only a sample of the conversations presented at this year's summit. There's a lot more takeaways, thoughts, feedback from the summit, so keep an eye on the Affectiva blog for more post-event content. You can find that by going to blog.affectiva.com, and that's also where you'll find information about next year's summit when the time comes, so keep an eye on the blog. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast for new episodes. You can do that by going to iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. We're also on social media, so please reach out to us on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram at Affectiva to share any feedback you have on the show and to weigh in on the discussion using hashtag AffectivaAsks. Finally, don't forget to rate us and comment with your feedback to make the podcast more discoverable for others. Until next time, thanks for listening.